Hello and welcome back to the ShefF1 Podcast. For the first time in a long time, I'm joined by Amy as usual. There's no Rudy, but he'll be back pretty soon. And today we're going to be previewing the Hungarian Grand Prix. But as it's the first time in a long time, Amy, why have we been away for so long?
Well, all three of us have just graduated from university. We've all got a degree in journalism. So we've, like the last few weeks, been doing our final projects and graduation. But even though we're no longer in Sheffield and we are called ShefF1, it doesn't mean we're going to stop. So from now on, we'll be back with hopefully weekly episodes on, race previews, debriefs, any sort of videos, whether it's interviews or challenges. So yeah, even though we're no longer in Sheffield, we're still carrying on. So make sure to tune into everything you see from now on.
Yeah, and because it's been such a long time, we're going to go over a little bit of what have been our favourite bits since Miami. That was the last time we did an episode. So yeah, Amy, first of all, what has been your favourite race since Miami?
I mean, for me, it has to be Silverstone. I think the way we went racing when it was wet, I think how it planned out where Lando Norris got his first home race win, Nico Hulkenburg got his first ever podium. I think it was like, it was genuinely a Silverstone for the ages, and even though loads didn't happen throughout the race, such as overtakes, I still think it was an incredible race, and probably the most exciting for a while. And I think Spa could have had all that if we did go racing earlier on, but Silverstone for me, and it was a great podium.
Yeah, I definitely echo those thoughts about Silverstone. I think it was one of the best F1 races for a long time. I think whenever you have a wet to dry race, I think that always makes it incredibly exciting because you get so much change in the order because it all matters about that pit stop. And even if you're a lower midfield team and you get that pit stop timing right, it doesn't matter how bad your car is, you will have a massive advantage. And we saw that with Sauber and Hulkenburg, and that was the feel-good story. It had the sort of controversy with the Piastri penalty and all that, and the battle for the lead. So I think it was, arguably a little bit of a perfect race. There was overtaking. It was, chaotic, but also, had some great racing in there. So, and it was the first race I've ever been to. So, obviously, I'm going to say it was my favourite race. But, that was definitely, I think, the best race since Miami. But since Miami, who would you say, Amy's been, in your opinion, the standout driver in that short spell of a few races?
It is a bit of a tough one because for me, I think the two McLaren boys have just been on another level, and so is the car as well. Like, that is a big thing towards that. But I think, they're constantly getting 1-2 since Miami. If we actually look at the race weekends, I would ever so slightly say, since Miami specifically, Lando edges it because, if he's not finishing first, he's finishing second, except for Canada, which is where Lando did DNF. However, it was the one race where he probably could afford to make such a big mistake because Oscar weren't even on the podium in that race. And where Oscar probably has ever so slightly dropped points is in Monaco, where Lando did win and Oscar came third, which is crazy because that's how close I think it is between them two drivers now, where, one position could be costly in this championship. So I think Lando's, prior to Miami, it was Oscar, clearly. Even though I would say probably the biggest mistake Lando's made this season has been in Canada. However, I think he's had some massive wins in Monaco, in Austria, and in Silverstone. And yeah, so I would ever so slightly say Lando has edged it in recent races, but it's close.
Okay. I think we'll get onto the championship battle in just a sec. For my driver of this mini 7-race spell, I'm going to go, no surprise, Pierre Gasly. I think just go slightly away from, obviously, the two championship contenders. I think outside of that, obviously, Max has obviously been great, but, that incident with Russell. Russell's been consistent, but Mercedes have sort of dropped off a little bit. And outside that, into the midfield, Hadjar, he's had his highs, of course, but he's not quite at the same level he was, obviously as to be expected in his rookie season. So I'm going to go for Pierre Gasly just because Alpine, it's absolutely chaotic at Alpine at the moment. I have no idea what's going on there. They seem to have the slowest car on the grid. They're bottom of the constructors, and yet Pierre Gasly is almost a constant in Q3 at the moment. We saw it last weekend in Spa in SQ3. He still managed to get a point. I think what he's been doing in that car, you think of what he did at Silverstone as well. He's got 20 points to his name, and his two teammates have 0. And he's, been putting levels to Colapinto, who I don't think anyone expected him to come in and beat Gasly, but obviously we saw what he did with Albon last year. It was pretty close, and you see how Albon's doing against Sainz this year. I think Pierre's dealt with Colapinto a lot better. Obviously, there's slightly more pressure on Colapinto, I think, this time around, but still, Gasly's dealt with him well. I think he's done, an exceptional job, and I think that he is the reason Alpine have any sort of hope of not finishing bottom of the constructors this year. And I think there were maybe some suggestions that maybe he wasn't the driver to lead Alpine forward. I think he's totally squashed them, and I think that if there are any doubts about any seats at Alpine, it is definitely that second seat and not Gasly's. I think he's definitely proven to both the team, especially to Briatore as well, that he is the driver to lead that team forward. And I know it's only a 7-race spell, but I've been really, really impressed with how he's done, and I thought he could maybe fall a little bit to the pressure or whatever, but for me, he's been the star of the midfield, especially in the last 7 races or so. But I know I'm biased, but I'm still going to say that.
Mm-hmm. So you said we were going to talk about the championship next, Seb. This is insanely close this year. It's the first time we've had two teammates probably be so strong in such a good car because of, I guess, the domination from Lewis and then into Max's era. Now we actually are seeing two incredible drivers going for the championship with the exact same car. But do you think it is only the McLaren drivers still in it?
Yeah, definitely. Even though pre-season I thought that Max was going to still have enough, I don't think anyone really expected the McLaren to be this far and above the rest of the field. I think that every weekend, no matter the characteristics of the track, they are the quickest car. And I think that there's only so much Max can do at Red Bull. And you think that the development sort of stopped as well for all the teams. Everyone's focusing on 2026. I can't see any reason why the current performance levels would change. And I think it is definitely between Oscar and Lando. I think maybe before Spa, I was sort of thinking that it's starting to swing slightly in Lando's favour, maybe a little bit. He was gaining some momentum. I still thought Oscar was slightly quicker. I think, obviously, you think of Silverstone and how Lando won there. I think without what Oscar did under the safety car, I do think that he would have won the race. And so I still think, especially with how Oscar did in Spa, I do think that Oscar's the favourite, but Lando is still, he's definitely in it because we neither of them have really dealt with a championship battle, but Lando did have a bit of an experience of it last year. So I think that maybe in the latter stage of the year, that could potentially catch up with Piastri a little bit. But I mean, it's still too close to call. If I had to call right now, I'd go with Oscar. I think he's just shown he's got slightly more pace when it really matters, and also I think he's a little bit calmer under that pressure. I think that Lando, I think we all know he does have a mistake in him. But Amy, I know obviously you've got a bit more stakes in this one. What would you say about it?
I think a word that keeps getting thrown around is consistency. That Lando hasn't got it and Oscar has. And I think if Oscar had that much consistency, he'd have a lot bigger lead than 16 points in the championship. At the end of the day, he's had 2 more race wins than Lando this season, and Lando's had a DNF. So I think you can't say Lando's not had consistency. Yes, he had a big mistake in Canada, but other than that, it's extremely rare where if Lando's not winning, he's not second place. But for me, it's so hard because I look at the driving, and when they rarely get to race each other, and it's hard to be able to tell who is the better driver. But from what I feel is that I feel like Oscar Piastri's better on the attack and Lando Norris is better on the defence. So when they do race, it's so back and forth. And I think that's where if Lando is behind Oscar, I can't see him getting past him. But when Oscar's behind Lando, I can see Oscar getting past him. And that's where I guess Oscar's had upped his game this season, and he's probably caught Lando by surprise. Lando's not always starting ahead of Oscar. Oscar's getting pole positions. He's starting at the front. And I think that's where the battling, I do think that Lando sometimes in race, when the battling can be the weaker driver. And that's why I think we've seen the mistake in, of course, Canada. But I do think that Lando is the quicker driver, and I think we've seen that in plenty of races where when they're nowhere near each other, he's flying. The amount of fastest laps he's got this season, I just think when they do come together, it's a bit of it's tough, and that's why I think Lando needs to get back on that pole position grind where he got it in Spa last weekend. And of course it was harsh on the restart where he had no battery. I feel like that actually was not a mistake on his part as such, where Oscar got past him last weekend, and then of course that controlled the whole race. But if Lando can start getting the pole positions and starting ahead of Oscar, I then think he can start getting wins over Oscar. I mean, all it takes now is a DNF from Oscar and a Lando win, and Lando's leading the championship. It is still so close, so for me it is too close to call. But even though I'm probably going to go with everything I've just said there, I still think Lando's going to win the championship. And like you said, it's that experience from last season that he's slightly got over him. And even though he's as cool as a cucumber, Oscar, I still think that it could get to him at the end of the season. And I think Lando could go and fly.
Yeah, I definitely think it is that qualifying difference that's been the biggest reason why they're so much closer than they have been in the last couple of years. You think 2023, 2024, Lando, as you said, was always starting ahead of Oscar, whereas Oscar's made a massive step up when it comes to qualifying pace relative to Lando. And when they are together, as you said, it's a little bit, bit twitchy between the two. I'm not, I like to see it, but it's also like you do feel like Oscar does more often and come out on top. But as you said, I think if Lando can start to get into a rhythm of, getting back in that sort of qualifying grind, and there was maybe at the start of the season there was sort of suggestions that the car wasn't quite set up to his liking and maybe a little bit more tailored to Oscar, and they've sort of gotten slightly back in Lando's favour now, and he should. So you think with that maybe he should start to put some, a bit more consistency together when it comes to qualifying and get back that ultimate that pace that we know he has. I do think that Oscar's made a step up in performance this year when it comes to qualifying, but I also think that Lando maybe isn't quite as comfortable with that car, and because I do think when it does come to over one lap, if you actually have their maximum pace, I do still think that Lando is slightly quicker. I think maybe when it comes to race pace, I do think it's slightly different. I do think Oscar probably has the edge, but when you're starting ahead, it isn't just race pace that matters. It is, you do get the lead strategy, and we saw that in Hungary last year that Lando ended up with the better strategy, and even though Oscar was on par in terms of pace with Lando, he couldn't get past him, he couldn't get close to him. So yeah, I think that for Lando to win this championship, it almost sort of needs to win on Saturday, and that's a weird thing to say when the points are won on Sunday, but for Lando I think that Saturday is so important going forward. But yeah, it is a very, very tight one to call. Moving away from that championship battle, we're going to go on to some other things that have happened since Miami. There have been quite a lot of big things that we've completely missed out. And first of all, Christian Horner is gone from Red Bull. I mean, who would have seen that coming, a couple of years ago? But obviously, started last year, I think we all thought he was gone. And then it sort of seemed to be brushed under the carpet. And now he's gone. And I'm guessing, I think the sort of consensus is that it's a results-based decision. What are you making of this decision? Do you think it's a good one for the team? Do you think that under new leadership they can maybe start to close that gap between the two cars?
I think on a results-based decision is stupid. However, I think there's been a tension in the team that's certainly not helping anything. So one thing, you can say a lot of things about Christian Horner, but one thing you can't say is that he's a bad team principal. Like, he has took that team from the ground and has won them, 8 drivers' world championships, and I don't know how many constructors, but it's a couple now. And I think it was needed for the team to be able to move on, maybe to keep Max. That's the big question, is did it involve, is Max going to base his decision off what Horner does? To go off it, say, it's just so odd. That team's been so odd for a while, and I think it's so strange how everything that happened at the beginning of last season wasn't enough to sack him, yet all of a sudden, on a random day, it was announced. Like, this was even more shocking than when I found out Lewis Hamilton was moving to Ferrari to me, because I woke up and I looked at my phone and my jaw dropped. It was one of them things, and I don't think we'll understand ever in Formula One why it was made. But like you said, it'll be interesting to see what Max does in this situation now. If he's 100% is staying, signs a multiple-year contract, then you can read into it and see maybe that's the reason why Horner left. But if Max still goes at some point, then I don't know, it's tough to call. What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think that, to be honest, I think that it is a good decision for the team. I think that, and this is maybe controversial, and I know that this is probably a strange thing to say, I also don't think it would be a bad thing if Max left the team, which is probably crazy because he is the best driver in F1. But I feel like the reason he's gone, that there's probably some stuff behind the scenes as well, but I do think it is that huge split between the two cars, and it's been a problem that's been consistent even when the team was successful, even when they were winning constructors titles. There's been such a massive gap in performance between one garage and the other, and he just hasn't been able to fix that, and it's clearly something he's not able to fix. And for Red Bull, they need 2 cars at the front. Red Bull are only in F1 for marketing, realistically. They're in F1 to promote Red Bull and their drinks brand, and they want 2 cars at the front. They don't just want 1 car at the front. And yes, they want Max to win, but they want 2 Red Bulls on the front row of the grid, and there's just no way that's going to happen I don't think under the tutelage of Christian Horner, because he's so desperate to keep Max. It almost feels he'll do anything to make Max happy, but not the team happy. Whereas I think maybe having someone with coming in with more of a team idea and team.
And he knows Yuki well. He had a great start to the season with Meki, so yeah.
I do think that it will be a good decision for the team. I think just having fresh ideas. They've lost so many key figures over the past few months. Obviously you think of Adrian Newey being the standout one. I think the team just needs a bit of an overhaul. They've had their dominance, and it doesn't look like they're going to be dominant for 2026. They've got a new engine. It feels like a whole new start to the team, and I think that having a bit of a clear out, I do think that Helmut Marko, I feel like, would be one of the next ones to go. And I think that just having a bit of an overhaul, and if that does mean Max goes, because if I'm honest, I don't think it's to do with Max, this decision. I think that maybe it is, and maybe it is to try and keep Max, but I think that Max, he's going to make up his own mind. It's just based on how good the car's going to be. I don't think it really matters that much about Horner or whoever's in charge. And I think that there's an acceptance that the team isn't going to be that great in 2026. Yes, they might nail the engine regulations, but I can't realistically see it when they're basically starting from scratch. So I think that just having a fresh start and maybe having a fresh driver lineup and keeping Yuki happy, having someone come up from RB and maybe being able to integrate the likes of Hadjar or Lawson back into the team, I think it's a good decision, and hopefully we'll see Red Bull sort of as a new identity almost, and start to build their way back up, which is sort of how it did at the end of the Vettel sort of dynasty, where obviously Horner stayed there, but they had 2 new drivers and they had to sort of build again, and it took them a while, but eventually they got to where they were with Max, and I feel like that's sort of the trajectory I can see them going on.
So you're saying Max leaving, like, potentially, where would he go to, and what would that mean for the rest of the grid? Because I think if any team's offered Max Verstappen, they're taking him.
Yeah, I think that the rumours that have come out that he's not going to leave for 2026. I think that's probably true, and I think it's smart for Max because realistically, even if Max does absolutely terrible and Red Bull are absolutely terrible in 2026, he'll be able to leave in 27 and he will have the pick of the grid. And if he has a year to wait and see who has the best car and an engine package in 2027, I think that he'll, no matter what team on the grid, I think everyone would take him, even if that is, say, McLaren, who have absolutely nailed the regulations, and Mercedes nailed the engine regulations. I think that he'll have the pick of the grid, to be honest. And I think he'll be able to choose where he goes. He'll be able to choose who has the best car and who has the best engine, who has the best combo, and he'll pick where he wants to go. If I had to predict, I'd say I think it will be Mercedes, just because of that. The fact that the works team and all the rumours are that they're going to have the strongest engine. So yeah, I think that it'll probably be Mercedes. I wouldn't be surprised if it was for 26. I would have said I think Kimi will go, just because I don't think it'd be a bad thing for him to potentially go, maybe on loan to a Cadillac or something like that. But because it's not going to be for 26, if it is for 27, I think it's a straight shootout between Kimi and George. And if I had to guess right now, I have no idea. I think I'd say Kimi will still go. Even though I really, really rate Kimi massively, I think that it is a results-based business, and I think having a George and Max partnership, I think that's too good to turn down. And I think as long as they keep hold of Kimi on the books somewhere, maybe if he went on, as I said, on loan to say a Haas or anywhere, or someone with a Mercedes power unit, maybe like an Alpine, I think that would make sense for him and make sense for Mercedes. So yeah, I think Mercedes, but realistically, it's whoever's got the best car, I think.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you mentioned McLaren, because I also believe that in 2027, I think if Lando or Oscar, whoever doesn't win it this year, or if they go for it next year, I think if that driver loses both championship battles, I could see them leaving, especially with Mark Webber being, Oscar's, manager. He will take him, I think, to Red Bull. And I could also see Lando going to Red Bull because, he'll feel hurt that he's built this team and then they're going to be prioritising Oscar. So I find that very interesting. But for me, Kimi, I just love him. I just love him. And I think he's had some really hard races the last few, and it was horrible to see him cry in Spa after it was a terrible sprint quali and it was a terrible qualifying session. But he's so young. He is so young at the end of the day, and he's in a car that Lewis Hamilton was racing in last season. And something someone said was like, I don't know. I think they could get rid of Russell, even though Russell's, I think, having an amazing season considering the car's not been the best. And someone said that Toto Wolff's almost trying to be like a Ron Dennis with Lewis Hamilton, and is trying to, do the same with Kimi Antonelli and bring this, this prodigy, which I think he is and will be, and is paying all this money. He'd have too much pride to get rid of him. And also, I do believe that I couldn't see Max wanting to go into a team with George Russell. I know it's only, they don't seem too bad off screen, but I just genuinely believe that especially Max really doesn't like George and wouldn't want to, be in a team with him. So I think if Max was to go to Mercedes, I think he'd give them an ultimatum and say, I'll only join if George goes. And that's why I think it will be Kimi who stays in that team as well.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I think especially when you think about Kimi, it's a really difficult one. I almost, at the start of the season, his first few races, I was really, really impressed with him. I do think he's shown enough in those races. His podium at Canada. I think he's shown enough in his time in F1 so far to say, okay, he will be.
He's here to stay.
One of the top talents. But I almost do wonder now if Mercedes would look back and think, should we have sent him to Williams? I think that maybe if he had gone to Williams and had that less pressure of fighting at the front of the grid immediately in his F1 career, I think it would have been better for him. A few races ago, I wasn't saying this. I was thinking, what a great decision by Mercedes. But I do think now everything sort of seems to be stacking up, and there's no way out for him. It feels like. Whereas if he had been at Williams, things could have gone under the radar a little bit more. You've seen that with Bortoletto at the back of the grid with Sauber. I mean, there have been some weekends he's been nowhere to be seen, and he's been plumb last in qualifying, plumb last in the race, but no one talks about it. Whereas when Kimi has a bad weekend, it's sort of all over everywhere, and you up against Russell, who's P5, P4, P3 or whatever. There's such a direct contrast. Whereas if he had been at Williams or even a Sauber or anyone, it would have been a lot easier for him. So I do think maybe Mercedes look and say maybe that was a mistake, and if they can maybe send him out on loan if he doesn't pick things up, I don't think that would necessarily be a bad decision. But that's not to say I still think Kimi has shown enough to me to think he has got it. But yeah, I don't know. What would you say about that one?
I don't know. I think moving him to, I think looking back now, the best idea was for Mercedes to take Carlos Sainz and Kimi go to Wimbledon or go to Williams. But now I think it's too late to send him to a lower team. I think there'd be so much pressure on him then to actually get really good results, and he's still so early into the sport. I think this sort of pressure on a driver that's world championship level, it's kind of needed. And I think until I've seen him crying, I still think, I personally, I'm not judging him. I don't think a lot of even the media will call it out, because it's still a Mercedes going out in Q1. It's still Kimi Antonelli. And he's still getting the points as well. Like you said, he's had a podium this season in Canada. And, you would hope so in a Mercedes, but he's top of the rookies, table, and it you would hope so, like I said, but it is just like, I think you've got to commit to it now. And I was really happy that he actually went to Mercedes at the start of the season. I was like, yeah, put him in that pressure seat. Now I'm looking at it and I'm thinking maybe that's not the best idea, but I think you'd be going in reverse if you sent him back down. And that's why I think you've got to go, even though George is their future and they've built him up to this point, I think they've got to go with Kimi, because Kimi is that raw talent. And when you think of names of Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, this is the next one of them, apparently. And I think you've just got to put that pressure on him potentially.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because there's always felt like there's the same sort of feeling around Kimi as there was with Max. But you do, and it always felt like, well, Max went in straight in the deep end, it almost felt like, with Red Bull. But he didn't go straight in the deep end. Yes, he was incredibly young, but he went to Toro Rosso and he wasn't up against, George Russell as a teammate. He was up against Carlos Sainz, but Carlos Sainz in his rookie year. So, he had that time to sort of bed himself in. And then he went into a Red Bull car, which was not quite, 2016, 2017 Red Bull was not the Red Bull we know today. And, it just feels a bit harsh on Kimi. It almost feels like they've looked at Max and gone, well, this guy's talked about in the same bracket as, Max Verstappen. He should be able to deal with it like Max did, but not giving him the same opportunity as Max. And yeah, I was very happy when he got that Mercedes seat. I thought, oh, that's, really cool, and it'll be really cool to see how he does. But now I'm just starting to get a little bit worried for him. I still think they have put enough, so much into him that they won't just bin him off. But I'm getting a little bit worried that he could just start to get a little bit caught up in it all a bit. And yeah, as you said, actually, I didn't think about, if you do send him, if they did send him now to a Williams, it is a swap with Sainz or Albon or whatever they managed to do, that pressure's going to be on him to beat whoever he's up against, because this is the next in line for Mercedes. So yeah, it's a difficult one. You almost wish there was a team at the back of the grid, like when George Russell had it with Williams, where he's up against an ancient Kubica or whatever, and it's
Alex Albon,
and just able to it's a difficult one for Kimi. So I don't know. I don't know what's next for him.
I think they've got to just commit. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I hope so, and I hope he just, as long as he has that reassurance that, look, we're gonna stick by you no matter what. This is something for the long term. Lewis Hamilton didn't enter the sport until he was 22 or whatever. You're still 4 years off that. Don't worry, you're gonna get the time you need. Then I think he'll be okay. And yeah, it's just all about his head. I think it's his headspace at the moment, which is the thing that's holding him back. But yeah, that's an interesting one to see, and it'll be an interesting one to see this weekend. And speaking of this weekend, we're going to do our predictions, which is something we haven't done for a long time. We're not going to say what the points are because, one, I don't know, and two, I was last, so we're just going to ignore that. So yeah, it's round 14, and Rudy has no predictions, so he's not going to get any points because, one, we didn't ask him for any, and two, he's not here. So there you go. Anyway, we'll start off as usual with pole position. Amy, who have you gone for pole in Hungary?
I was actually watching some videos today of this driver, and it was actually a young Lando Norris just doing some great overtakes in a wet race in Hungary back in 2018. And yeah, I think this is a track that favours him ever so slightly more. I think he's extremely fast, and he proved that when he wanted to prove a point last year, when he got right out ahead of Oscar's space and then still had to give him back that play. I think it's his track. Like last week was in Spa, was Oscar's track. This is Lando's track, and I think it'd be nice to get pole position just before we go into the summer break. So Lando Norris is my pole position.
Yeah, and I'm going to go with Lando Norris as well. As we said before, I think it is all about for Lando that Saturday, winning on the Saturday, and then obviously, onto the race. He has a good start, but I think the Saturday is super important, and I think that Lando is going to have a really good Saturday once again, and I think that he's going to start, trying to build that momentum. I think that, as you said, I do think it favours him slightly, and I think that he's going to have confidence off the back of his one lap pace last weekend. And as long as he can tell himself that the battery issue was not his fault, I'm sure he'll still have confidence going into the weekend. So yeah, I think that Lando will have the edge over Oscar this weekend. I also think that Oscar, maybe it could start getting into his head. Last race into some break, can I go into it with a big lead or whatever? So yeah, I mean that's probably a minor point, but yeah, I'm going to go for Lando Norris. But just because he's our pole position doesn't mean he's our star of qualifying. I'm not sure if I said that right, but anyway, onto our star of qualifying. Amy, who do you think's gonna outperform the car or have a real standout qualifying?
We've actually just spoke about him. I'm gonna go for Kimi Antonelli. I think obviously it went nice seeing him have two really bad qualifying sessions last weekend. But again, I'm gonna use my history of this track to my advantage. When I was in Hungary last year in the F2, Kimi Antonelli won the feature race, and he was incredibly fast, and he finished that race. I think it was like 8 seconds ahead of the rest of the grid, so I think he's fast around here, and that's something about Kimi Antonelli. This is a fast track, and he has just got raw speed. So for me, I think he's going to be up there. I don't know where that'll be. I don't think it'll be maybe top 3, but I do think he'll outqualify George Russell, and that'll be something. And it's meant to be raining all weekend, so cold conditions is going to potentially give an advantage to that Mercedes car, and therefore I'm going to go for Kimi Antonelli as my star of quality.
I'm going to also talk about someone we've already talked about in this episode, but someone I've already talked about in this episode. I'm going to continue my bias. I'm going to go for Pierre Gasly as the star of qualifying. As I said, since Miami, his qualifying has been really, really impressive. He keeps making it into Q3, even though you look at the practice session, I'm looking at it and thinking, Jesus, Alpine are by far the slurs this weekend. And then somehow he manages to pull things together. So I'm going to say that Pierre is going to somehow scrape it into Q3 once again in that Alpine, whilst Colapinto's out in Q1 or Q2 or something. So yeah, I'm going to go for Pierre Gasly. I think he's just going to continue that really good form. On to a sadder note now. We'll go for our flop of qualifying. Who do you think's going to have an absolute stinker in qualifying this weekend?
I kind of struggle thinking of one here. So my point was, for start, was that Antonelli was going to out-qualify Russell. And if Russell is going to get out-qualified by his rookie teammate, Kimi Antonelli, I think that's a bit of a flop. Therefore, he's my flop.
There you go. I'm going to go for sort of something on a similar thing where if Lando Norris is on pole, well, Oscar Piastri isn't in the quickest car, so that means he's a flop. I'm going to go for Oscar Piastri as my flop of qualifying, also into that sort of thinking that, maybe it could start to get in his head that, he's got such a big lead of the championship and, this is the last race before the summer break. He's got to make it count. I just think that, I can see it maybe getting into his head a little bit, and Lando, if he's quicker in every practice session and, Q1, Q2 maybe, then, Oscar might try and push it a little bit more than he needs to. And yeah, I can see him maybe not being on the pace of Lando this weekend, and maybe, you never know, a little shock P5. I think that would be a shock for Piastri. So I think he's going to be my flop of qualifying. But yeah, now on to the race, onto the Saturday. What's your podium, Amy?
Well, it's going to be some Lando Norris redemption from last year. He's going to go and start on pole position, and he's going to lead every lap. And wow. I think maybe not every lap. Oscar might end up leading one before he comes and pits, but pretty much every lap. And so Lando Norris first. I think, like you said, he's the one chasing at the end of the day. Like, the pressure is on Oscar, and it's closing that gap back up again to 8 points. And Lando first. Second, it's just so hard not to go for a McLaren 1-2 these days. I think Oscar will be right behind him, pushing him. I think it could be a similar race to Austria, where we do see them get extremely close. But like I said before, I do think Lando's defence is a lot stronger than maybe Oscar's, and I know he'll be on the attack, but I just think he can keep him behind, especially at a track that he's stronger on him at. And then in third, I've gone Verstappen. I spoke about how this track, I do believe, is extremely raw speed, fast, and when I think of a driver who's got raw speed, it's Max Verstappen. So therefore, I think after a few trips away from the podium, he'll be back on the podium.
Yeah, I'm going to go for a slightly interesting podium as well. I don't know if yours is that interesting, but mine's a little bit interesting. I'm going to go for Lando Norris from the lights to flag victory. I think that he's going to be comfortable this weekend. I don't think that there's going to be any sort of mishaps or anything crazy like we had last weekend. And I'm actually going to go for P2 though, Max Verstappen. As you said, I think this track favours, the pure drivers. They call it like, a mini, an F1 go-kart track sort of thing. And I think that Max Verstappen, will be able to get the most out of that Red Bull car. You think of Suzuka, Hungary, they've got sort of slightly similar characteristics, and he's absolute dominant in Suzuka. So I think that Max is going to have a good weekend. Not enough pace to, the challenge the two McLarens, but I think that he's going to get P2. P3, I'm going to go for Lewis Hamilton having his first podium. No Oscar Piastri on the podium, but I'll get onto that later. But yeah, I think that Lewis Hamilton, he's been okay the last few weekends. I think obviously last weekend in Spa he wasn't great, but in the race he was decent. And before that, I think he had sort of been getting a bit closer to Leclerc in qualifying. I think he'll have a good qualifying. Obviously he was on pole here a couple of years ago. He's done really well around Hungary, of course, before he got his maiden victory here. I think that Lewis Hamilton will get his first Ferrari podium.
The thing is as well, Sab, is it's rumoured to be a wet race, and I'd say your podium is the three drivers who are probably best in the wet. So,
well,
arguably,
also put them in there as well, but. I think that obviously if it is a wet race, obviously that it could shake things up a little bit more. I do think obviously Norris, Verstappen, Hamilton, it speaks to himself, the three of the best drivers on the grid. Obviously when it comes to wet conditions, they're going to be right up there. But anyway, just because they're our podium doesn't mean either of them are going to be our driver of the day. Who is going to be your driver of the day for the Sunday, Amy?
I'm going to go for a driver who's really not been in the limelight at all of recent races, and that's Yuki Tsunoda. Since moving to Red Bull, he has not been glowing, let's just say, in comparison to how he was at RB. He is a driver for me who's got a massive amount of potential, and it's just not being able to show it in that car. And I think last weekend, obviously we spoke about Christian Horner leaving, and Mekis is a team principal who has experience with Yuki, who actually was doing really well at the start of season with him, and there was a bit, he did well, he got into Q3 and he was just a bit unlucky in the race and to not get into the points, but I can just see maybe second weekend with a new team principal, new morale in the team, and I could maybe seeing him getting high up into the points. And it'd be nice for Yuki because I don't think this is a reflection of him as a driver, his last few performances, and hopefully it'll end a good way going into summer break for him to start again in the next half of the season.
Yeah, I definitely hope that Yuki has a better race. Hopefully give him some confidence going into that second half of the season, as you said, because I mean, I can't believe, if you look back at our video when he was announcing that second seat, we did some predictions for what we thought he'd do for his time at Red Bull. I'm pretty sure I said he'd win a race and get multiple podiums. So, yeah, he needs to step it up if that's going to come true. But my driver today is not going to be Yuki Tsunoda. It's going to be Nico Hulkenberg. Purely on the fact, I mean, Sauber, just every weekend, even if they're starting like P20, you just have a look after the pit stops, they're P10 or whatever. They keep constantly getting in the points when I have no idea how they're doing it. Obviously, Silverstone was obviously a prime example of that. But even last weekend, Hulkenberg was starting pretty far back and still managed to... I mean, he should have finished P10 if they hadn't done a random second pit stop. But yeah, I think that he's going to have one of those weird results where, he could be P6 or something like that and just randomly up there. And obviously, if he does that, he'll be driver of the day. And obviously, as you said, if it is going to be wet, Hulkenberg, he proved in Silverstone, he's definitely got the ability to call when's the right time to pit, when's the right time to come onto slicks, or when's the right time to go on onto inters. So I think that Hulkenberg he's one of the best positioned midfield drivers to get one of those weird results, maybe like a Gasly or Ocon did in Brazil last year and himself in Silverstone this year. So yeah, I'm going to go for Nico Hulkenberg, but just because they're our driver of the day doesn't mean they're a flop, which doesn't make sense. But anyway, our flop of the race. Who's your stinker this weekend?
A team for me that's just been really up and down is Haas. And, you spoke very highly, of course, of Pierre Gasly. And obviously, not more so a rookie driver in Colapinto, and probably has a lot more pressure than a rookie driver. He's literally fighting for his career. But he has just been outperforming in qualifying, in the races, and someone who, don't get me wrong, Ollie Behrman certainly has a mistake in him and has been sometimes, dead last qualifying. But he's still at times doing a lot better than Ocon, and it is up and down with them too. So for me, I think it's going to be either one of the Haas's, but I'm going to go with Ocon because that's a bit more of a shock than, I guess, Behrman being a flop, and I'm going exciting. But I just think Behrman's been, on the odd occasion, just doing incredibly better than Ocon, where Behrman has his bad racing, so does Ocon. So it's like he's outperforming him, and therefore I just think it's going to continue on that trend, and Ocon's going to be right back down there.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I've gone for Ollie Behrman as my flop. I definitely agree with the statement that Haas are just all over the place this year. Some weekends they're right in the fight for points, and some weekends they are the slowest team. And it fluctuates between driver as well. I don't know what it is, but I don't know if it's the two drivers have got completely different driving styles or something like that, and they have to set the cars up differently. I don't know what it is, but one weekend Ocon somehow finishes like P6 and Behrman's P12 or something like that. And then the other weekend, it's the other way around. And I have no idea what's going on at that team. But yeah, I do think that it will be one of those two. And I've gone for Ollie just because, I don't know, I feel like Ocon hasn't really done anything in the past few weekends. So I feel like he's due a result. There's not great logic, but I'm going to go for that. I think that Ocon will maybe finish in the points, and Behrman, yeah, as you said, he has got a mistake in him. And when he does make a mistake, they do sort of seem to compile a little bit. So I think that he could maybe have one of those sort of weekends. We saw it in Brazil last year. We maybe saw it a bit at Silverstone this year. So yeah, I think he's just going to have, especially if it rains as well, I think that he could have a bit of a stinker. So Behrman's going to be my flop of the race. But what about, we'll move on to teams now. Who's going to be the best team this weekend? Who do you think are going to get the maximum out of both drivers?
Well, a team that has been so consistent all season is McLaren, and it's so simple for me to just go McLaren every weekend. But if I'm going 1-2 in the podium, that means I can trigger a McLaren best team. So they need to finish first and second. Otherwise, it'd be a bit easy to go for McLaren every weekend. But I just think the amount of 1-2s they've been getting consistently, and it's been 6 this season, 1-2s, and the most other other than that was Senna and Prost. So they got 10 in one season, and of course we're only halfway through, and they have 6. So another 1-2. I'm gonna potentially break that Senna Prost record. Will be interesting.
Yeah, I think that these are predictions. We're predicting what we think is going to actually happen, and I think that everyone probably thinks, McLaren. That is what's going to happen. I mean, no one will be shocked if McLaren are 1-2 this weekend. But I'm not going to predict McLaren because I don't know. I don't want.
Well, you can't as well. Yeah.
No, and obviously I also predicted Piastri's not on the podium, so that they wouldn't be the best team. I'm going to go for Red Bull. Obviously, I predicted Verstappen P2, and I'm going to follow your trend of saying Tsunoda's going to have a better weekend. I think that he'll definitely finish in the top 10. I think even if he finishes, Verstappen finishes on the podium, Tsunoda finishes P5, P6, that would be a great weekend for the team. I think that maybe Ferrari, they were also a little bit inconsistent, especially between the two drivers. It's sort of, they're not to the extremity of Haas, but they also have a little bit of, one driver does great on the weekend, the other doesn't do quite as well. More often than not, it's Leclerc doing great and Hamilton a bit all over the place, but sometimes it's the other way around. So that could happen again. And then Mercedes, likewise, but, Russell's always there or thereabouts, and Antonelli, we're not really sure. So I think that Red Bull, who haven't had a weekend where both drivers have been up there for, it feels like years, I think that if Tsunoda does well, we know Max is going to be up there. So I think that Tsunoda does a bit better. Then I think that Red Bull could put in a claim for having the best weekend for one of the teams. Now we go on to, I think, our favourite prediction to do. It's our shock prediction. Amy, what is your absolutely shocking prediction?
I think that, because I've got banged on about how this is going to be a wet race, the drivers are going to have wet tyres on. Not intermediate, wet tyres. Now, this hasn't been used since the new wet tyre has been introduced. No one's used them. So, we're going to go racing. We're going to go proper, dangerous racing. And what Spa should have been. And what Silverstone should have been. And this is finally going to be one of the wet races for the ages. And, that's what I believe is going to happen.
Well, I hope not. I hope it's all nice and safe. But I think everyone wants to see the wet tyres in action for the first time in a long time. I'll just say that. My shot prediction, I'm going to go for Oscar Piastri to DNF. That's why he's not going to be on the podium. I've actually really hounded in on him this weekend. I've said he's a flop of qualifying, he's not on the podium, and he's going to DNF.
Poor Oscar.
And now we all know he's going to go for like.
Yeah, sure. Why did you say that? I should have said it. It would actually happen.
Pole position, flag to lights or lights to flag victory, and then fastest lap, whatever. No, I'm going to go DNF. I think maybe could come together with Norris, maybe similar to Canada, but the other way round potentially. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. Obviously, I think if he does qualify behind Lando, I think he's got a lot of confidence thinking that going into turn 1, I can get Lando. And even if Lando maybe puts in actually a really good defence, I still think Oscar feels like he'd be able to go for it. And maybe a crash could come from that. I don't really know. And also, a stat that's been doing the rounds this week is that he's had 41 finishes in a row, and he's quite close to the record of Lewis Hamilton's 48 race finishes in a row, I think it is. Or is it Max? I don't know. Either one of those two as the record for that.
And it's about time.
So that's... Yeah, so I don't think he's going to break the record. And I think it would be quite funny if everyone's been saying, he could break the record, and then the next race he goes and DNFs. So,
he's been slightly...
And that would make it a shock.
He's been slightly dodgy in the wet. I mean, we've seen Australia. And a lot of these races weren't his fault, but Miami sprint race was rain, and he lost under the safety car. He had his safety car infringement in Silverstone. Yes. So, he could have a little mess up again. Maybe he just doesn't like the rain, Oscar.
Yeah, maybe gets the plays in his head
Watch
a little bit.
Watch it not even be a wet race.
Yeah, I know. It won't be a wet race. Piastri will win from the start. And Tsunoda's going to be absolutely terrible. Antonelli's going to be terrible. And
Lando DNF. Touch wood.
Lando DNF, and the championship's over by Singapore. Okay, we're going to leave it there for this episode. But thank you for watching. And Amy, it's been great to be back, hasn't it?
been brilliant. I've been
It's
happy
been-
to be
yeah.
back.
Yeah, we'll be hopefully, as we said, some weekly episodes from now, and Rudy will be back at some point over the summer break. He's on holiday, having a nice time. So yeah, have a nice time, Rudy, and we'll speak to you soon. And yeah, we'll see you shortly after the Hungarian Grand Prix to review our amazing predictions. And yeah, we'll catch up then. But yeah, thanks for coming on, Amy, once again.
Thanks for having me.
No problem.
And thanks for watching.
Yeah, thanks for watching. And we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.